Hey everyone, RogueGold here, and welcome back to Survival. So this is going to primarily be a follow-up video to yesterday's news. If you didn't catch it, I will link the video down in the description. Highly recommend you do check it out. If you couldn't have guessed by me being in here, Survival is coming back to the Division franchise. They're adding it to the Division 2 under the name The Division 2 Survivors. Look at that, man. Nothing like it. So yesterday was really all about the reaction to that crazy news that got unveiled, and today I'm going to talk a bit more about my thoughts, theories, and break down some additional information that we've gotten since then. And so I thought what better way to do it than while playing through a match of the original Survival, both for comparison's sake since we now know it's coming to the Division 2, but also because I know there are a good amount of people out there who never played the original Survival, so hopefully this gives you a good look at what it was like in the original. To me, you know, there's always been a few standouts of Survival, stuff like the gunplay, the fact that you focus a lot more on the core combat. PvP was always really fun without some of the added layers that you get in places like the Dark Zone or Conflict. But it was also simply the immersion. I mean, just look at this, right? I barely have any HUD. It's just the cold meter at the top, and you're just walking through this blizzard trying to see what's out there. But as I said, primarily I want to talk about some of the bigger bits and implications from yesterday's news, starting with the significance behind the involvement of Magnus Jansen, which by the way I've been calling him Magnus Jansen for all these years. Turns out I'm just terrible with name pronunciation, so my apologies. But this was the guy, if you watched the live stream or my recap on it, this is the person that they brought out on stage once they announced that Division 2 Survivors was a thing. The one really neat part about his involvement is the legacy, right? If you didn't hear them say, he was the original creative director on the Division 1, you know, all the way back in 2013 when they revealed the game at E3. So although he has worked on other stuff in the meantime, to now have him back on the Division working on this, that's pretty major. But on the other hand, though, his involvement also indicates that there are some big new resources being put into the Division IP and franchise. You know, we asked for Ubisoft to commit to the Division all these years. Well, for one, Survivors has its own creative director, as we know with Magnus. He's going to be working on that project in conjunction with Yannick, who as we know is the creative director on the base and ongoing Division 2 live game. Now, this part hasn't been confirmed yet, but I believe that that would indicate that there is like an additional whole new team working on Survivors at Massive itself. You know, I talked in a good amount of my previous videos about how there would likely be new resources opening up at Massive once they released Avatar and Star Wars, which were the two major projects they were working on post-Division 2. And so if this is the case, which again I still need to confirm, if it is, that would mean that we're getting even more content for the Division 2, because the Bucharest team that we know is still going to work on seasons and whatever live content is coming, and then we would now have this additional team working with Magnus to produce Survivors, which again could release on top of whatever plans are already coming. So that in and of itself is pretty wild and indicative of where I think the future of the Division is heading, but it also does bring up a good amount of logistical and timeline questions for the larger Division universe, as I've seen a lot of people discussing since the news broke yesterday. Firstly, there's just the question of what exactly Survivors is going to be, right? Is this just going to be another game mode for the Division 2, or is it going to be an actual like dedicated DLC? Speaking to that DLC part, I've already seen a lot of people go out and be like, oh, this is absolutely going to be like a paid $40 DLC. I would be highly skeptical of that. I know a lot of people like to be cynical when it comes to the Division, but they just put out Battle for Brooklyn at $15. Oh, I do not want to get spotted by the heavy, who will absolutely mess me up. We're just gonna wait him out right here. But yeah, if you really think that they would put out Brooklyn and then turn around and put out a much smaller DLC that doesn't come with a new space, it's just DC in snow for more than double the price, that's not gonna happen. See far enough away to avoid sound detection? I'm gonna hope so. What? I swear I can aim. Yeah, Survival is all about managing your resources and what kind of threats you can actually take on. It is nothing like the base game. And to further back up the claim that I don't think they would make this a paid release, you have to remember the fact that Julian Garrity, who is the executive producer for the Division franchise, he is heavily involved in this project. And he's the one who famously went on record to say that one of their biggest mistakes with Survival in the original Division was how it was paid and walled off from the base game, and how that fractured the player base. It didn't allow Survival to get the kind of attention and mainstream, you know, mainstream appeal, if you will. I know I've used this clip in a lot of videos, but take a listen to it right here.
Fantastic. I think it's one of those things that, because we split the community, it wasn't quite,
Yes.
it didn't quite get the shine that it should have, and I think it's a shame because there's so many great emotions and player stories that come out of that mode that to give it a little bit more shine and visibility, put it on a pedestal a little bit, I think is something that we should be doing.
For sure, for sure.
And so, yeah, if you weren't aware, Julian is heavily involved in this new project. He was quoted, in fact, in the article that they released on it yesterday. He said, "The Division 2 Survivors is as much your baby as it is ours, and we strive for transparency during its development. Clear communication and community involvement are our focus as we build the new experience, and we will be closely involving you as we move forward on the development journey." So I think that mostly puts that to bed, right? I would, again, be very surprised if this was any kind of a paid release. On the flip side, I've then also seen people saying that, well, just because of how this is structured, and it very much seems like it could be its own standalone free-to-play game within the Division world. Again, I think that's kind of doubtful as well. Now, the fact that Survivors has its own creative director and isn't directly in development by Yannick and the Bucharest team is certainly interesting, and we'll get back to that. However, let's not forget that the Division Heartland, which certainly has been talked a lot about these past 24 hours, was exactly that. It was a standalone, free-to-play version of the Division's survival mode, and that got canceled, as we all know. So the irony of them turning around and doing the exact same thing here would be pretty huge. And so I really don't think that that's the direction that we're going to see them go in either. So yeah, if you've never played Survival, by the way, the goal is to spawn in, you survive, obviously, and then you're trying to get to the dark zone in order to extract. I just crafted the filter that's needed to get in there, but I think we're going to hit up a few more resource spots before we go in. But yeah, on the note of Heartland, I've seen a lot of people saying since the announcement yesterday, being like, oh, I knew that they would go in and repurpose Heartland somehow. Oh, I forgot to equip my skill. I definitely need to do that. But yeah, my reaction to that is, how exactly are they repurposing Heartland? Survivors is going to be in a different season, winter. It's a different map. It's in the Division 2's map. From what we've seen so far, it doesn't look like they're going to use any pre-made characters or melee weapons or sliding, which were all things that Heartland was trying differently. I know it's annoying to be cryptic. I wish I didn't have to be, but I really do think that Heartland is pretty much just gone. People keep thinking that the Division 2 team is going to try and repurpose it in any way they can. At this point, I really think it's kind of out of sight, out of mind, unfortunately. If you couldn't tell by comparing the concept art that we've gotten of Survivors to what I'm playing here in the Division 1 Survival, Survivors is a successor to the Division 1's mode right here. Nothing more, nothing less. But again, though, we come back around to the question of what exactly is it going to be? If it's not a paid DLC, if it's not like a free-to-play standalone thing, as I've said before, I do more or less think this will just be a free add-on to the Division 2. I mean, they clarified specifically in all their comms that this is going to be something within the Division 2. A couple of reds. You could probably take them. Where are these guys? Those are reds too. All right, we're going to play it risky. I'm going to flashbang this guy, and then we're just going to go all out on the rest of them. Let's see how this goes. One shot. Two shot. Start getting the rest of them. This guy's probably good now. Yeah, I need to back up. It's very nice that my AUG has Predatory on it, so I can regen some health as I'm fighting here. Just pulse and make sure they're not flanking me. This guy is. But that leads us to kind of the bigger question that a lot of people have been asking again since this news broke yesterday. If they're saying that Survivors is still a ways out, like probably at least a year, is the Division 3 really then going to be that far away if they're releasing this for the Division 2? And the answer is yes. I mean, I've been trying to say this pretty much any time I bring up the Division 3, but that game is a lot further away than a lot of people are wanting it to be. Are these guys the gold? Can't see them. Are they the gold patrollers? Yeah, I'm not messing with that. But yeah, even though the Division 3 was announced in 2023, I think that's where a lot of people are getting confused, that they think that day it started development. Star Wars Outlaws was still the priority at Massive when that was announced. They were just saying this is our intent to make the Division 3 once that game is done. And so from this point in time, the Division 3's team didn't really assemble and start working on it until about 9 months ago. And we don't really know right now if the game is in full production or if they're still kind of in a pre-production phase. But the truth is, AAA games like the Division 3 is going to take a long time to make. So yeah, this game is still a ways out. March of 2028 has been my prediction for quite a while, but even some people who are saying it could release after that, I don't think that's unrealistic. But even with that said, I do think it brings up a pretty good question. Would they go through the trouble of bringing on what looks to be an entirely new team to build this survival successor within the Division 2? Even if Division 3 is a little bit farther out than some people are thinking, it's still only going to have probably like a year and a half, two-way runway in the Division 2 once it releases before the Division 3 is here. All right, here we go. Are y'all ready to enter the Dark Zone? Let's do it. All right, this is where things begin to bug out a little bit. We start getting our first signs of trouble. Classic, man, classic. So yeah, would they go through that trouble if Survivors is then only going to have like a maximum 2-year runway in the Division 2? That also seems doubtful. This Lavoa has way more recoil than I was remembering. I'm so used to Division 2 just having no recoil, whereas Division 1 has so much. But even in the Division 1, you can still get those very satisfying cleaner explosions. And so yeah, especially since Julian is now in the position of overseeing the entire franchise and being the one to make all of these decisions, bring all of these plans together, it would seem rather short-sighted, in my opinion, to then put all these resources behind finally bringing back Survival just for it to expire whenever the Division 2 does. So here comes my big theory for the video that I would be very curious to hear your guys' thoughts on. What if Survivors, even though they're calling it the Division 2 Survivors, what if it's not just for the Division 2? Something worth noting is that with all the communication we've had on this new content thus far, they have not called it a game mode for the Division 2. If you take a look at the official Twitter post, they call it a new survival extraction experience. And very interestingly, on the Division 2's website, they updated this like, I swear, 15 minutes after the Gamescom panel ended because I went and looked. On there, they list out when the base game was released, which was of course in March of 2019. And then they go on to shout out the 2 major releases that the game had post-launch. Of course, those being Warlords in 2020 and Battle for Brooklyn earlier this year. However, they've now gone and added a card for Survivors, saying that it was announced at Gamescom that this new experience is in development for the Division 2. Modes like Countdown aren't listed on there, Descent isn't listed on there, and then again we circle back to the idea that you brought back somebody like Magnus Jansen just to work on one game mode for the Division 2, and that requires its whole own creative director. Also, if you go back and listen to the panel, almost the entire time he refers to Survivors as the game, right? Or like it's its own game.
What do you mean we're gonna tell people, about the game?
Now, I don't want to harp on that specific point too much because it's very possible that this is just a translation thing. Obviously, for a lot of these people who work on the Division games over in Sweden, English is not their first language. And I'm sure, since he's the creative director on whatever this is going to end up being, it very much could feel like it's its own game, even if it is just a part of the Division 2. So, here goes the theory. You ready? What if Survivors is going to actually be its own separated mode and experience that is then built to transition and also work inside of something like the Division 3? Now, to be clear, I'm not saying this would be like Heartland, which was its own standalone free-to-play game, right? You would still access this within the Division 2, but perhaps it's more separated than something like, a Countdown or a Descent is. I know that might sound a little bit confusing, but in my view, this would make a lot of those other kind of weirder details about this so far make a lot more sense. Because instead of just making this specifically content for the Division 2, if they were to do it this way, then it's an experience and a mode that you can evolve and grow as the franchise continues on, again, with the Division 3. And so then by the time we get the Division 3, maybe you access this kind of mode from the main menu, you could then go back and play the DC map of Survivors if you want to, and then by that time I'm sure they would go and add in wherever the Division 3 is going to be located as a map. Alright, we got our antivirals, which is what we need in order to go extract. But yeah, if they were to do something like that, I think that would be very interesting. That then opens the door for them to actually go in and change some things in terms of gameplay, in terms of mechanics, even though it would still be inside of the Division 2. Kind of a Division 2.5, if you will, right? They could implement even some gameplay things that they're potentially considering for the Division 3. To be clear, again, this is entirely my own speculation. I could be completely wrong, but I do think that's a very interesting possibility that is on the table. Alright, and then the final point that I wanted to tackle within this video is just to briefly throw out some speculation on what we might actually see within the Division 2 Survivors, right? How is it going to be different, the same? What are they going to do compared to the original mode? Well, as a lot of you likely know, so far we have very little official information. We have a handful of concept artwork, and then we have Magnus saying during the panel, basically all he said was that it's going to be wintry, survival, and extraction gameplay. Ooh, I got an ACR here with responsive and deadly. Definitely going to use that. So pretty much the only noteworthy and interesting teaser that we got from Magnus during the presentation has to do with the name itself of this new mode or experience or whatever. So take a listen to this.
But what I will say, and this is like a teaser, is that a hint to maybe the biggest new thing we're doing is right there in the name.
So the title supposedly hints at one of the most major changes they're making to the mode for the Division 2. Interesting. Honestly, I would love your guys' theories on this. I don't have too many on what exactly that could mean. All right, it's time for me to go Mission Impossible style here and steal this loot on the roof without the landmark hearing me. But pretty much the only thought I have in that realm is that the original name of this mode that I'm playing, Survival, it very much fit with what you're doing, right? You're surviving the night. You've been crash landed in the middle of the city. There's an infection, right? It's a blizzard. You're doing everything you can to survive. On the other hand, Survivors indicates, at least to me, that you're talking about people who are actively surviving within an environment. And so in my mind, I think that this new mode will ditch the infection concept. And what I think we're going to see them focus more on is the whole idea of surviving winter in the world of The Division. I could see them putting a lot more emphasis on supply gathering, right? Resource wars within DC under this blanket of snow that the city's been put in. Think back to that concept art that we got where you see an agent carrying a hunting rifle and looking at this family of deer. Even concept art that we got yesterday, which shows this hostile faction, you know, stockpiling supplies, and this agent is sneaking up on them. I really think that that's the direction that they might take this in, more so than this original mode, which again was just about surviving this one specific scenario. I think that we may be in for a more action-centric, larger scale presentation of, like I said, surviving the winter in the world of The Division. But as I said, those are just my thoughts, and I would love to hear yours. But yeah, all in all, that is most of what I've got for this video, my friends. I'm beyond excited that we're getting survival back in The Division 2 under the name Survivors. I think I said in my video yesterday, so long as it involves PvP and we get similar amounts of immersion and just fun dynamic gameplay as we did in this original mode, I'm so excited. That's going to be so fun. All right, but who am I kidding? It wouldn't be a survival video if we didn't go and fight the hunter at the end. So let me quickly stock up before we go do that. Of course, we need the flare gun to extract. I'm going to get a good high-end sniper because this tends to be my hunter-killer weapon. And then we got to pump our stats up with some high-end armor, of course. All right, here we go. Our UI is going to start glitching out the closer we get here. And then, oh dear, what is this? That's what I'm saying, man. The world building and the immersion in this mode is so good. All right, here goes nothing. It's always the scariest when you don't know where they are. I'm also disrupted, so I can't pulse. Oh, is that him down there? Yes, it is. Got a heal box. Now, unfortunately, when you know how to play the mode right, you can actually beat them pretty easily. But still, the hunters are a big threat in this. And yeah, back when they were first introduced, this is their first ever appearance. Nobody knew how to fight those things. That's actually one aspect I'll be very curious how or if they will even play a part in the survivors mode. I would think they have to, right? But hunters nowadays are very different from back when they were introduced in Division 1. We know their lore. We know how to fight them. So yeah, that's one part that I'll be very curious to see how they adapt. All right, here comes the chopper. We got that concept art in Survivors of that agent like hanging off of a ladder from a chopper. Imagine if you actually got to do that. That'd be crazy. But there we go. Successful extraction. Thank you all so much for watching the video. As always, I can't wait to hear your thoughts down below, and I hope you guys are excited for Survivors. Of course, we have a long way to go until it's actually here, but I think, as I said yesterday, just the fact that it's happening is wild. So I'll catch y'all back in the next one, but until then, folks, RogueGold out.